Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. And this week we're looking at if you think about last year, we had client quitting, and this year we're looking as the market opens up. Do you have a talent drain that's leaking? One thing we know about when the market starts to move and market starts to change, that lots of recruitment agencies look to take advantage of that. They look to upskill their business. They look to recruit new people as well as retain their existing staff. So there's lots of pressure on recruiters at this moment. And I think the only stats that I can give, which would be frightening stats for anybody and should be frightening stats, is that here in the UK, in the recruitment market, there's a 43% attrition rate overall. However, depending on who you read in year one, that increases to between 60 and 70%. So we start to think about those stats alone, you could lose potentially 43% of your staff. Okay. And as the market comes up and people start to take advantage of the market, those that are wanting to accelerate away will start to look to recruit really quickly. So it's about how you retain your staff and what you do to retain your staff. This week, I'm joined by Dave. Dave happens to be in the Black Sheep Coffee House in Chelmsford. I'm here in my home office in Leeds. And then I'm joined by Heather Solway, who happens to be slumming it in the south of France. So all boo and hiss for Heather Solway because she is in the south of France. There we go. So I'm going to start. I think this is a very interesting debate. And we talked about cyber a couple of weeks ago, and we've had very few people on that, or not on all numbers of people on that. And I think, again, this might be a little bit short of numbers, but I think this is the one that we need to really concentrate on because it is about your capability and capacity to accelerate away from as the market starts to grow. So the first question is, okay, what are the most common signs of a potential talent drain, and how can recruitment leaders proactively address these warning signs?
You know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are warning signs, and we'll talk about the warning signs. But honestly, I think it's really, really hard to spot sometimes. And the number of times I've had recruitment leaders talk to me about being surprised when they lose somebody. You know, people are very good at hiding that decision. And in some ways, I think it can be dangerous to wait and base your decision making and your actions on spotting the warning signs. Actually, you have to be assuming that your staff are at risk all the time, and you've got to be on top of this and not waiting for the warning signs. As I say, people are very, very good at disguising their intentions, particularly in this industry.
Dave?
Yeah, and actually we're hiring people who are supposedly and hopefully good at conversations, and therefore, to your point, Heather, they're people that if they don't want to tell you something, they won't. As good as you may be with them, they're very good at doing that. I think we had this at a client I was working with on Monday, and in the conversation at the board meeting was one of the staff feeling a little bit like it isn't quite what she was sold at interview. And I think one of the warning signs for all of us is expectation management. We work so hard to get hold of good people or people that fill the roles that we've got, that often we are overselling them what it's really like. And then the hiring manager or the hiring team leader, whoever it is, isn't being measured on just what have you said and what is the reality like. And then people leave. I mean, it's horrifying to think that more than half your staff would leave in that first year, but it's true for a lot of recruitment companies. So I think it's about managing the expectations on the way in, because people, it just isn't what they thought it was going to be like. And I think that's difficult when there's a lot of choice out there for people. Because remember, this is still true today, people don't choose recruitment in the way they choose teaching, or they choose nursing, or they choose to go into to another profession. Most people still kind of fall into recruitment. If you fall into something, it's very easy to fall out of it as well, because you don't have that passion, that vocation, that love for it. You're just there to see what it's like. So therefore, you've got to manage expectations on the way in.
I think that's an interesting comment from both of you, and I think there's two ways that I look at that. I think that, you know, people don't fall into people fall into recruitment rather than choose it as a specialisation. I think that is changing slightly at the moment, and I think a lot of people are choosing to be into recruitment rather than before, when most people sort of fell into recruitment. I also think that, you know, is it hard to spot? Is it not? And you're right that recruiters are very good at disguising lots of things, and, you know, how they work on that. But I think it's also, if you start to look at, you know, Dave, you mentioned productivity there and things like that. You know, what I tend to see, and I'm going to go back through my career, when I started to notice people who are good billers, good average billers, great billers. What I did start to note, and this is the bit that you think, is that there's a lag between productivity and activity, and then a drop in productivity, as in the outcome of the gross profit. And what I started to look at is, when I started to see sort of a number of people leaving, I wanted to understand whether I could spot that early. And what I'd noticed in all of them, that their productivity started to drop, their interaction in the business and in the team started to drop. Where they would normally go out on a night out with the team, they weren't there, or they'd go home early and things like that. So their interaction started to drop. So I started to sort of look for common signs that said, you know, is this person a potential leaver, or do I have a potential issue that I need to address with that person before that? So I was always looking for those warning signs, because you're right. Sometimes you can't spot them from the outside, but sometimes the little details give it away. And I think sometimes you can't spot the drop in billings, because those billings have been created over the last 3-6 months. And therefore, it might take 3 months before that billing actually starts to be affected by what they're doing. But you can start to see the drop in productivity, the drop of interaction, and how they, you know, become a little bit cold. And I always think it's that natural fight and flight that kicks in. When people don't feel part of a tribe, they feel fight or flight. So they either are getting a little bit edgy and a little bit argumentative, or they're just withdrawing completely and ready to run away. And I think they're the two things that I would start to spot and start to look at. So is there a drop of activity? Is flight and fight kicking in? Are they becoming a little bit more, you know, obnoxious, a little bit more obtuse than they normally were? Or are they now just hiding completely and disappearing off the scale? So they're the sort of signs that I would look for and look at if people are leading. That leads to a second question, though. So how can recruitment leaders then effectively balance the immediate talent retention strategies with long-term talent development to create a sustainable workforce?
It's a really good question, Howard. And for me, I don't think it's about balancing, because I think they're both part of the same thing. You know, if you are focused on long-term talent development and creating a sustainable workforce, you're going to be ticking all the boxes for talent retention strategies. You know, I think they're both part of the same continuum, and it's not really about balancing them. We have to be focused on people having a career in our business, being developed, being invested in, being valued, and being on top of the detail in the way you describe, Howard, is part of that, right? So, you know, you just talked about spotting the warning signs by noticing stuff. If you're on top of the detail in your business, you're going to spot that stuff. I think you're absolutely bang on with that. But individuals, it's about being focused on their development, their career, their individuality. And we're going to talk. I don't want to skip forward to your next question. But there's some great initiatives that we can talk about in your next question that do exactly development and valuing. It's not about today's billings, it's about tomorrow's billings.
Yeah.
And the year after, and being focused on individuals' longer term development, not just on how they're doing on the desk this week.
Yeah, and Heather's spot on, because I don't think as leaders we spend as much time as we should with individual people focusing on their learning and development. And that's the most important aspect of growing a successful business. I'll give you an example. In April, a business that I know went through the usual round of, right, we're going to sit down with each individual and we're going to assess what they're going to deliver this year. And it was a time for the consultant to speak to his or her team leader, and the team leader would say, right, tell us about your clients, tell us about your business, tell us about how many contractors you've got, how many people you can place, all of that good stuff, which we know is important. The meeting was 90 minutes. 80 minutes was focused on their business and what they were going to do. The last 10 minutes was, right, what can we do for you to help you get there? And it was just the wrong way round. I'm not saying it should be 80 minutes, 10 minutes the other way, but it should be at least 50-50. At least 50% of the time speaking to your individual consultants. And remember, these are people who will be facing your customers, but also the people in the support services. You know, your marketing team, your HR team, your IT team, they are intrinsically valuable to the success of your business. What do they need to help make them valuable? What can we do as leaders to help make them valuable? So for me, it's making sure there is a much more rigorous focus on learning and development and needs and trends and what's going on in the market and what's going on in their lives as well that may be coming up. You know, they may be saving for a flat, a house, whatever it may be, and that's really important to them. More important than perhaps whether or not they make 10 placements. The reality is they've got to make the 10 placements to get there. But let's focus on the motivation. Let's focus on their development. Let's focus on the learning that they need. And I think you've got a better chance of retaining good people.
I think it's an interesting, I wrote the question based on what happened to me on Monday. I was with a client all day on Monday, and they'd had a really massive Q1. They'd knocked Q1 absolutely out of the park, and they'd had an absolute abysmal Q2. And the owner of the business was all for, let's get stuck into these people, let's have a go at these people, etc., etc., etc. They're just not doing what they should be doing, could be doing, can be doing, etc. And I eventually got the owner to agree that what we wanted to talk about is actually get everybody in, small business, 10, 11 people in the business, and let's listen to what they have to say and let's talk to them. And so we did exactly what you were saying there, Dave. We spent 25% of the meeting talking about what's gone on, and then 75% of the meeting talking about what we can change going forward, what we can do going forward. And it was really interesting watching the big billers versus the new people in the business have the conversation, and how that they all felt really empowered. And it was really interesting that I got a call yesterday from the owner saying, today has been such a different day than it has been forever before, because everyone seems to have that accountability. Everyone seems to be locked in. And I think when you start to balance talent retention and long-term development, I think it's about balancing and listening to what they're saying and addressing some of those things, and then listening to what they need. Because from that conversation, we got training needs analysis, we got areas of the sale that we thought we were inconsistent with, and therefore we need to become more consistent with. We've got overall agreement from the whole team. And it sort of reminded me a bit of the conversation that we had with Christian Hughes about 4 or 5 weeks ago, when he was saying, don't recruit the people for the job, recruit the people for your team and create a stronger team. So recruit the people that come into your team. So look at the values, the beliefs that you want. Look at how you want people to react in your team when things are going well and things are going poorly. And it was a really interesting sort of meeting. So it was an hour's meeting. Okay. But it was interesting watching people leave where they had accountability and they had responsibility for the actions. And what they'd all agreed was equal responsibility for each other. That if someone's not doing what they should be doing, then we should be doing that. And they should be all then looking at consistency in their results. And so it was I thought it was a balancing act between looking at what people want and what people can do and listening to them and getting people to join in. So I think to create a sustainable workforce, you've got to create a team environment that everybody's in the same boat, pulling in the same direction, rather than everybody in individual boats just rowing like around a lake. And I think that's what we have a lot in recruitment. We have a big lake that everyone's in, and individual boats rather than one boat, all in the same boat, trying to pull in the same direction. So you were starting to allude to this, Heather, because obviously you read the questions, which is nice. So what innovative approaches have you seen or implemented to engage top performers? Because this bit is we're talking about the top performers and prevent them from being lured away by the competitors.
So one of the things that I've seen actually encompasses some of the things that you two have just both been talking about. So in one of the large corporates that I worked in before, we had some people who had hangover incentives from a previous venture capital exit. And we knew that they were in for a decent payout, having, when we got 2 years past the buyout. And so we knew that some of them would have been hanging around to get that money. And once they got it, they were risks, right? But the reason they were getting that money is because they were hugely valued. So you end up with some really highly performing, highly motivated people with that something's coming up that might be what they've been waiting for before they go. So we have this big pool of risk. Who those people were that we felt were at our biggest risk of losing a good 9 months before that event was coming, and meetings to make sure that they were invested in the business, that they felt valued, that they had a career. And so we had I would meet regularly with their CEOs, and we had a list of people where we had actions agreed, and we were both, me as head of learning development and HR, and the CEO of the business, do for those people to make sure that when that payment was made, they didn't think, oh great, I've got the money, I'm off now. Yeah, that we'd actually worked really hard, and for some of them it was giving them specific qualifications that we were going to fund them to go on. For some of them it was, or it might be something to do with the commission structure, or it might be a combination, or it might have been taking them out for really nice lunches with the group CEO to make them feel, but we had individual plans of action for those people where we understood what their goals were, what their motivation was, and we started it really early. It became an ongoing process, and it was so successful. We didn't lose a single person that we had identified as being a target to lose, and as a result of that, we put in those sorts of programs for everybody. So we ended up with a business in a much wider sense, which sort of brings me to the second half of that initiative thing, which is about how you measure success in this area. Because I've seen a lot of organizations talk on LinkedIn better than the industry average, but LinkedIn about measuring retention, nothing to shout about, it's nothing to aim for. Like, if you're better than that, that's not that difficult, right? Because it's so poor. But rather than measuring absolute retention, we measured targeted retention. So we made managers and directors in the business, people in this business that you really are going to be devastated. And then we measured their ability to retain those people based on that list. Because we've all seen people leave your business and you go, oh yeah, well, we didn't really want them to stay. Where they wouldn't really fit with our business. Where we said, okay, you tell me who are the people that it would be a disaster if you lost them. And so that we kept people really focused on it. And that really helped because it took away that excuse of saying, well, I didn't really need them anyway. It took that away. So I know there's a bit of a time lag on my voice. I apologise.
I think, Heather, you hit the nail on the head, because it was interesting. The last part of Howard's answer was about team. Hire for the team, not the job. And yet you focus very much on, and rightly so, about the individual. You spent time with the individuals. And I think in terms of what I've seen, both with integrations, but also with growing teams, does every member of your team, whether you're a 2-person business or a 50-person business or bigger, does every member of your team understand the purpose of your business and understand where they fit into that purpose? Because if they do understand that, you've got more chance of keeping them. You've got more chance of retaining them. You've got more chance of promoting them and then getting involved. And also, you're going to make better hiring decisions, because those people who are absolutely engaged in the purpose and the belief of the company, who are respected and valued, are going to hire people like that, and they'll know how to manage them. So it's about understanding everybody's individual motivation, where that fits in with the purpose of your business, and then spending time with them, developing that, honing that, and hopefully you'll retain people better. The other tip that I've had with slightly bigger companies is that when you can see, because you spent time as an individual with somebody, you can see that they're itching to go it alone. They want to do something on their own. And I've seen it work very successfully in a couple of companies where, instead of losing really good billers to set up on their own, they've set up an incubation program where they've actually incubated that business and kept them within the business. And sometimes it's worked in that they've stayed a bit longer, but it's given the CEOs more time to plan for some eventual exit. And sometimes it's actually worked where they've stayed and have become part of the business. So I think there are a number of techniques out there, irrespective of the size of your business, to retain people. But it's about looking after them and making sure that they understand the purpose and where they fit.
So I think, as I'm just messaging Heather now about the internet and what we can do, I think this is a great thing that we all go through. And I remember sort of going through this at some of the businesses I was having, looked at my top performers. And the thing that I looked at was, again, what Heather was talking about, individualizing programs for these individual people, making sure that they were aware how much we wanted them in the business. And to your point there, Dave, I remember my own resourcer wanted to stop resourcing and go be a salesperson. And he'd got an offer elsewhere. And I said, look, if you don't want to stay here and do that, I don't think you're ready yet. And he stayed for another 6 months, left, then took the job where he wanted to go, but then came back 18 months later and became one of my biggest billers in another business, because you suddenly realised that how we looked after him, what we'd done for him, was completely different. And I think that's the bit, is how you make these people feel. And that law of a competitor is a feeling. If they're not feeling that they are appreciated and not feeling that they are part of the tribe, they're feeling that they are just on a treadmill, then they will go elsewhere. They will move off elsewhere. And I think we've got to start to think that when you start to implement things to engage top performers, what Heather was talking about was personal programs, personal training programs, whether that be to do with recruitment or not, is really important to them, and find out what's important to them. It was quite interesting. On one of them, they wanted to give up part of their commission to put into something else. And it was interesting that it wasn't the money that they were interested in. It was about their personal development. So we said, well, why don't we just pay for that and do that? And so it was about finding more about them and what they wanted and how they fitted in. The law that other competitors have was based on two things. either a promotion or an increase of salary, or look at our culture. And they were the things that we found that most people moved for was promotion or more money or culture. And the culture led back to how they were being managed and how they were being led. And once we understood that, we got better people in or worked with the managers and led them better. And it massively reduced our retention problems. And we massively retained our big billers. And we went on a huge, great way of billing loads and loads of money because these people stayed. And we had to stop that little sort of revolving door attitude of people coming in and going out. And what we looked at was those people that were 18 months within the business up to 5 years. They were the people that we thought was really at threat, and we treated all of those people as individuals rather than as part of the community, but made them part of the team and worked on that sort of front. So I think it is about that individualization of it. Okay, so
yeah, Howard, just before you move on, sorry, I'm going with voice only in case that's clearer than with video.
That's really clear.
One thing I'd add to that. Okay, thanks, Dave. One of the things we did was have compulsory meetings with line managers and their teams. So at least once a month, they had to have a meeting that was nothing to do with their desk and their targets. So it could only be about them as an individual, their relationship with the organisation, their hopes, their dreams, their desires, their development, whatever it was, but it had to be focused on that person as an individual, not on the desk and not on their performance. And the reason for doing that is that the good performers were going to be targeted by headhunters, by rec directs. And what we wanted to be doing is having that conversation where we were highlighting the dream ahead of somebody else doing it externally. So if we made sure we were having this is the dream conversation with people, they were less at risk from that conversation from a rec to rec.
So one of the things that Adecco did, which I thought was really good, we set up a mentoring program. So at a board level, we were mentoring the people below us. Okay, but I wasn't mentoring people in my team. I was mentoring people outside of my team. So it'd be in maybe a different part of Adecco. And then for myself, we were getting mentored by the heads of France or the heads of Germany or the heads of that. So all of a sudden, there's this huge mentoring program going right across the business. And it massively helped retain the senior level of people within the business because everyone felt they were getting an input from a different part of the business. People thought they were okay. And that whole conversation, Heather, was not about recruitment. It was about them, and it was about them as people. And it was a very different way of looking at it. Okay. So as we move on then, can we share then some successful methods of identifying and nurturing high potential or high performing employees who can form a second line of leadership?
And I think some of that will come out.
Go on, Dave.
Is that okay? Sorry, a slight delay. I was going to say some of that will come out if you're doing the things that we've been speaking about in the first half an hour of this webinar. Understanding your people's motivation, looking after them, making sure that there's alignment in their performance, but also in their purpose. If you're having those conversations, you'll begin to see leadership traits. And it's not about age, it's not about tenure. If you're good enough, then promote those people, put them into positions of leadership. You know, some of the best leaders in our recruitment business are very, very young. Yeah. Equally, some of our best leaders have been around a long time and they kind of get forgotten about because they've been around a long time, but they've got a wealth of knowledge. It all comes back to, do you understand what motivates them? Do you understand what type of leadership styles you have in the business and who's best to do that? And I'm a big advocate of promoting early into leadership with the right support, with the right mentoring, with the right tools, because you've got to give people a chance. And to Heather's point earlier, if you don't give them a chance, somebody else will. And better that you keep them within your business, because that shows longevity, that shows skills development, it shows leadership and understanding, and it's a good sign for others coming up and joining the business as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dave. I've got two kind of ideas that you could think of that I've worked with before, very different from each other. So one of them was in an organisation, quite a large-ish. We're about 150 people in this business. But what we did was we ran development centres. So they're very similar to an assessment centre that you would use for recruitment, but you use them for existing staff. So same sorts of things, same sorts of exercises or psychometrics or interviews that you would use in assessment, but not for recruitment purposes. And it was to identify what the skills and talents were of people who already worked for us, and then to create a development plan for them individually. So that was a really good way of spotting early the people who had both the desire but also the potential to become leaders of the future. So development centres are a brilliant way of identifying and nurturing high potential employees. The other thing that I've done much more recently with a much smaller organisation was one of our clients that had about 12 employees, but a really big growth plan. And they knew that they were going to need some more people to manage the business other than just the two owners. And they understood that they were going to need to build a management structure for them to be able to grow effectively. So what they did was they got everybody in the organisation to do a management development program. So I ran 4 or 5, I can't remember now, but 4 or 5 modules for them on the basic skills that you need to be a leader, to be a manager, to understand what the role is and the things that you're going to need to do. And it gave everybody in the business the chance to understand what the role involved, and for those who then wanted to do it, to put their hands up and go, do you know what? I would like to be part of the leadership of this growing organisation. And it was fantastic for kind of democracy and culture and values and understanding. And we spotted in those modules some really talented individuals who we then could develop to become the managers. And because they were growing quickly, they had to bring in a couple of people from outside as well. But there was no resentment because everybody had been given a chance to put their hand up, knew what they were taking on. So it was a fantastic way of nurturing and spotting talent and desire in a much smaller business.
So I'm going to add to that, Heather, because I've done exactly the same with 3 or 4 companies now, where I'm now on the 3rd and 4th tranches of managing the people coming up and putting them through management. But it wasn't just about having them or having us identify who are the next leaders in the business. It was about creating layers of leadership all the way through the business. But it was also about identifying certain people who didn't want to be leaders. And therefore, some of the big billers who had been pushed into leadership in the past that had left, they were no longer in that sort of pep out where they'd gone through that training and said, actually, I don't want to be a leader. And there was no stigma attached to it. It was, right, what do you want to be? And that's what we started to do. So we started to nurture people around about what they wanted to be rather than where we thought they should be going. And therefore, the career structure sort of took a bit of a battering to a certain degree. But what we ended up having is these people are on the management tranche, these people are on a individual program. But what we found after a while, that quite a few of those people that had at the time gone through the management course and said, I don't want to be a leader, were now coming back and saying, right, I've now changed, I've grown over the last 18 months, circumstances are different for me, both outside of work, inside of work. I now want to go on to become a leader. And so it gave them the right opportunity to grow through themselves and be nurtured by their own capabilities. And then if the time was right to step into those type of roles, but there was never the push to get them into that role. And I think that's what we do. We push the biggest biller constantly to become the next leader when they might not want to be, and therefore we lose those people. So it was identifying that. So it wasn't just about leadership, it was about moving the business to the next level. The owner of one of the businesses came back to me probably about a couple of months ago, actually, and said one thing. He said, you're now on the 4th set of people that we're putting through that management training. This is the first time I've ever been able to go away on a 2-week holiday and turn around to the top end of my management team, which is the first tranche that went through it, and say, I don't want to hear from you for the next 2 weeks. I want to hear nothing. I expect you guys to run the business. And when I come back, I expect it to be running as it is now. And he said he heard nothing. He could properly switch off, properly relax. And he came back and he said, these guys had absolutely nailed it. And I think that's the bit where you're nurturing, training people, trusting people to deliver, and therefore you as the ultimate leader can switch off, refresh, and come back and drive again. So I think what we're all talking about is the same thing. It's identifying what plan the person's on, nurturing that plan, and looking about them building that second string of leadership. Because I think your team leaders, your big billers are the most influential people in the business, irrespective of the business owner, because that's all who new people look up to. Because they're the people they see billing and moving through the business. So if we give them the right capabilities to move through the business in their way, then it's a very different process. So in what ways then can a company create inclusive growth opportunities that cater for a diverse talent pool and ensure that every team member sees a clear pathway in advancement? I think I've just started to talk about that.
Yeah, and this one's a really interesting one. I had a bit of a debate on LinkedIn with somebody about this, because for me, when we're talking about the key for me in this question is a diverse group of people. And we are guilty sometimes in this industry of assuming that everybody's on the same trajectory, and that there's kind of one or two paths through recruitment, and that's it, and everybody's on the same. And sometimes I think that's why we're not getting as diverse a group of people in the business, or keeping as diverse a group of people in the business. And it links really clearly to what you're saying, Howard, in terms of individual understanding, individual motivation, individual development, layers of management. But it's understanding that at different points in people's careers, they might not want to be on the same trajectory. Yeah. So as people, people say, oh, it's such a young industry. People are all so young. Well, that's because we kind of assume we build everything for people who are on this single trajectory. But actually, maybe what we need to do is think that there's some wiggly lines in there, that people might want to take a step back and do something different, or a sideways move, or that they might not be driven by commission anymore, but that they might want to take a different path. And so that's the bit I don't think we always get right, and that we could work really hard on, is understanding that not everybody has to be on this same desire to move in one direction for them to still be valuable to us. There are different ways of being valuable to the organisation. And there are different things for us to value in them. And so having that kind of ability to think more broadly and in a more diverse way about what people want will help us create more diverse organisations.
Yeah. Now, I can feel a soapbox moment coming on for me. So I'll be really good, Heather, and I won't get on my soapbox. I'll stay seated in my little cafe seat. But I will make the very obvious point that the first question we asked was about talent drain. And here we are talking about creating more diverse organizations. And there is absolutely substantial evidential link to companies that are more diverse have access to greater talent and access to greater innovation. There is no doubt about that link. So as leaders, I will just encourage us to look in other talent pools, look for the ways that other people are managed and how they develop their careers. Don't assume they'll follow the same path, as Heather has said, as they grow in our recruitment sector. But we should widen our scope of where are these people that can help fill some of those roles, and how innovative our organizations would be if we widen that scope. There's a whole series of webinars we could do to talk about it. Don't need to. I'll just encourage you. You know Dave, where our hearts are.
But Dave, there's no good just us looking, right? We can't just look in those different pools and hire from those different pools. We have to manage people differently, right? So we have to have different expectations, different trajectories, different talent plans, and that all comes down to considering their individual needs and not making assumptions about everybody's got to be on the same path and heading in the same direction. And the particular argument I had on LinkedIn was about people who are overqualified for jobs, and that being a completely legitimate reason for turning somebody down. And I'm incensed by that, because it's just, that's a whole nother webinar. But, being overqualified, it's not a justification for turning somebody down. But anyway, I won't get on my particular soapbox about that. But
I'm having you absolutely 100% spot on. It is what we do with them and how we manage them. But you've got to get them there as well.
I'm not going to add to that.
Keep them.
I'm not going to add to that, because I think I can't add to that, because what you're going to say there, Dave, you're not on a soapbox, because I'm on the same box. I think we've got to look in different talent pools to bring different people in. We've got to look at the same behavioural needs that you want from the business, but have a diverse pool within that need. If you recruit the same people over and over again and you get the same problems over and over again, there's a reason why that's happening, because you recruit the same people. Yeah. So we've got to change that and do that. And Heather is absolutely right. You've then got to treat people individually and push them through that career path within the boundaries of the path that you want and they want. And if you have to stretch it, you stretch it to make sure you do that. So what role then does, and I think this plays into this question nicely, what role does company culture play in retaining top talent, and what acceptable steps can leaders take to cultivate a culture that attracts and retains the best employees?
Dave, are you going to go for start this one, or shall I?
I was waiting for the lag, Heather, just to see if I was going to cross it. Just given the time that we've got left, I mean, company culture is so important, because those companies with a better company culture, both at team level, office level, company-wide level, retain their staff more often, because people like working there. And remember, we're now working in an environment where many of our people are working at home. And we still want to retain and grow our company culture, even though for some part of the week our staff are working from home. So working on your company culture, which is an amalgam of all the different people you've got working in your organization, whether that's 2, 5, 10, 50, whatever it is, it's working on that. And it makes a massive, massive difference. And I think we all know that. So I think it's really important that we do spend time developing our culture and understanding what it is about our people that helps create our culture. What is our culture like? How is it formed? And getting people involved in that as well. The more our people are involved at all levels, it frustrates me sometimes when I see people have away days, but the teams that are in the support services part of our business don't get to go. Well, that speaks volumes about company culture, as in it can't be that great because not everybody's included. So include everybody, listen to everybody where you can, where it's appropriate, and build the culture. I think it's so important.
So I agree with you. Culture is everything. So the bit I will, in a very unusual move, Dave, because I rarely disagree with you, but I would challenge your use of the good culture, right? I don't know that we know what a good culture is. What is important in my view, is that you know what culture you want and that you go out of your way to encourage it, to recruit people who fit into it, and who will help you achieve your goals. The biggest issue with culture isn't that we don't have one, it's that we're not consistent. So whatever culture it is you want in your organisation, you need to have people who will thrive in that kind of an organisation working there. And then you need to be consistent in how you reward and acknowledge the behaviours that sit with the culture you want to create. So I think it's very difficult. We can easily be judgmental about this is a good culture and that's a bad culture. It's a culture that's appropriate for you to achieve your goals with the people you've got and the kind of business you want to be in, and then be really consistent about hiring and managing and developing and leading in your culture, because otherwise you just get this incongruity where you're hiring people and you're telling them one thing and they arrive and it's something different.
Yeah.
So I think that comment there about there is no such thing as no culture, I think is what sort of I pulled from there. You're either a low performing culture, a toxic culture, a high-performing culture. If you have no culture, then that's the culture. There is nothing to aspire to or attain or keep people in your business, because there's nothing that binds people together. So what we've got to start to think is, if we bind people together, it's about the common ground, it's about the common values. You can still have massive diversity within those type of periods and things, because that's what it looks like. So you've got to start to think, if you want to go back to getting culture, I'll go back to that Christian Hughes comment, which I think is probably the best comment I've heard all year about culture. Recruit for the team, not for the position. If you recruit people into your team that makes your team a better performing team, then your culture will start to grow and develop. If you recruit individuals, then you may create an individual culture where performance is based on individual performance, but therefore you'll start to create clashes if their individual values don't mix. And that sort of leads to the last question, which is, after all the discussions we've just had, why do we think there's 43% attrition overall rate? Why do we think multiple sources are saying it's between 60 and 70% in year one in recruitment? And I think that links directly back to what we've just said. It's all about the culture. And in the modern world, it's not just the Gen Zers, it is everybody. If the culture isn't what was said when you arrived and it's different, then people will leave, because there's more opportunity out there. And there's lots of opportunity out there. So I think culture plays a huge part in the retention of talent as well as the exit of talent.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Howard. And I have one other soapbox that I'll just throw in there. So I wrote an article 2 issues back. I wrote an article for Recruiter magazine in the last but one about why we have such high attrition in recruitment. Honestly, there are way too many people who are making decisions about recruiting into recruitment businesses who have no place doing it. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're looking for. They don't know how to spot it when they see it. And we make, as an industry, and this is not a criticism of the people on the call at all, across our industry, we make very bad hiring decisions, and we are not very good at recruiting. And if we recruit the wrong people in the first place, of course they're going to leave.
Yeah. So I think that goes back to that conversation that we've had constantly about, we need to be hiring on behaviours and values first, then on the will to do the job second, and finally on the skills. Because if you've got the skills but you haven't got the will, you'll never perform. If you've got the skills but you haven't got the right behaviours and values, then you'll annoy everybody else and you'll detract from what you're trying to build, and performance will drop. So it is, to me, always about values and behaviours first, will to do the job second, and then skills.
100% correct.
Yeah.
100% correct. And we miss that. We miss that too often.
And my final point I was going to say is, often we are asking ourselves the question, can this person do the job? And relating that to culture and retention and what we're speaking about, add the one word to the end of that sentence. Can this person do the job here? Can they do it here in our environment, in our culture, with our leaders and our style? And if you understand the second part of that question, can they do the job here? You're more likely to have a better retention rate.
So I think that's, when we're training consultants to find candidates for clients, the first thing we think is, can they do the job? Will they do the job? Will they fit into the job? And will they fit into the team becomes a third one on that list. So we'll draw it to a close there, because we went over time. Too many soapboxes this week from you two guys. Too much soap going on. Next week, we've got a really interesting conversation. Okay, next week we're going to talk about, is your business obsolete? How do you cope with departing clients? And it's all about, do you think that you are known in the market or not known in the market, and how you can counteract that, and what you need to do to counteract that to get more clients to work with your business. So, ladies and gents, thanks for attending. Heather, enjoy France. Dave, enjoy your coffee and your trip into London, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you very much.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Heather.